Have you ever felt like you're just spinning your wheels with your content? You're creating all this great new stuff, but you're just not seeing the results you expect. Well, it turns out your biggest competitor might be a lot closer than you think. In fact, it might actually be you.
Okay, let's just dive right in with a pretty provocative question. Could that brilliant new article you just published actually be sabotaging a really successful one from last year? It's a surprisingly common problem, a sort of silent killer of content strategies, and we're going to uncover it and solve it right here.
So, we're talking about something called content cannibalization. And yeah, it's pretty much what it sounds like. It's when your own content starts fighting against itself, creating this internal civil war for attention. So let's put on our detective hats and investigate what's really going on. At its heart, keyword cannibalization is actually pretty simple. It's when you have multiple pages on your site that are all trying to rank for the exact same thing. You think you're showing how much of an expert you are, but what you're really doing is just confusing the search engines. You're basically telling them, hey, I can't decide which of my pages is the most important one for this topic, so you figure it out.
And the consequences of that confusion, well, they're pretty significant. You end up watering down your own authority, you confuse the very search engines you're trying to impress, and you can actually hold back your best content from performing as well as it could. And maybe worst of all, you're just wasting time and money creating work that's essentially doing the same job.
So, the real question is, how do you get ahead of this? How can you catch these overlaps before you even hit that publish button? Well, like I said, you have to think like a detective.
And every good detective needs a toolkit, right? So we're going to look at a really powerful way to do this, using 3 different signals, or clues, if you will, to analyze content and spot these dangerous overlaps with some incredible precision.
Our whole investigation relies on 3 types of clues, and each one gets a little more sophisticated than the last. We're going to start with the most obvious evidence, just a simple word match. Then we'll look for clever disguises, when things are rephrased. And finally, the really cool part. We're going to learn how to understand the motive, the actual meaning behind the words. So let's open up that toolkit.
Okay, our first clue is called lexical overlap. It uses something called the Jaccard index, which is really just a fancy way of measuring how many important words 2 different phrases have in common. Think of it like this. You're comparing 2 different shopping lists to see how many items appear on both. It's like finding clear fingerprints at the scene of the crime. It's direct, undeniable evidence that there's an overlap.
But what if your culprit is a little more clever? What if they try to disguise their words? Well, that's where our second clue, fuzzy matching, comes into play. This technique is specifically designed to catch phrases that have been reworded or tweaked but are still targeting the exact same core idea. It can see right through the disguise.
And here's a perfect example. You've got Python on Raspberry Pi versus write Python on the Pi. Now, they don't use all the same words, right? But fuzzy matching is smart enough to see past that. It knows they're about the same fundamental topic. And this is a huge leap forward from just, counting words.
And that brings us to our third, and honestly most powerful clue, semantic equivalence. Now we're going beyond just the words on the page and into their actual meaning. It uses this incredible tech called sentence embeddings, which essentially turns the intent of a phrase into a set of coordinates on a map. So phrases that mean similar things, even if they use totally different words, are going to land really close to each other on that map. It's basically a mind reader for your content.
So how does it measure how close things are on that map? It gives you what's called a cosine similarity score. But don't worry about the name. All you really need to know is that when that score is high, like around 0.90 or more, it's a very strong signal that 2 phrases are almost identical in meaning. We're basically putting a number on meaning itself. It's just wild.
Okay, so we've got our 3 clues, the fingerprints, the disguises, and the motives. But how do we take all of that evidence and come to a final verdict? Let's see how the system actually makes the call. The final decision comes down to one of 3 rules, and this is where you get to choose your strategy. You can play it safe and require both the meaning and the words to match up. You can take a more balanced approach. Or you can be aggressive and flag anything that looks even a little bit suspicious based on any one of the clues.
And you can fine-tune it even more from there. Adjusting the thresholds is kind of like telling your detective exactly how much evidence they need before they can make an arrest. If you raise the thresholds, you're telling them you need a really strong case, which reduces false alarms. But if you lower them, you'll catch way more potential overlaps, even though you might get a few more false positives in the mix.
All right, this all sounds great in theory, but how do you actually use it? Let's walk through how this whole detective toolkit turns into a practical, day-to-day strategic workflow.
The key here is to think of this as a learning process, a loop. You start off with some safe, conservative settings, and you run a report. Now, the most important step is right here in the middle. You analyze the close calls, the maybes. That's where you learn. And based on what you find, you tweak your thresholds. And you can even teach the system to ignore certain words that are unique to your industry. So you're not just using a tool, you're making it smarter with every single cycle.
At the end of the day, the real power of this whole approach is teamwork. Each of these signals covers the other's blind spots. Lexical gives you that hard, clear evidence. Fuzzy catches the clever rephrasing, and semantic understands the deep meaning. And when you combine all of that with your own custom rules, you create this incredibly powerful, personalized defense against cannibalization.
And really, that's what this is all about. This isn't just some negative tool that's designed to block bad ideas. No, it's a positive, strategic tool that helps you build a stronger, more focused, and way more effective library of content, where every single piece has its own clear, unique job to do.
So I'll just leave you with this one question to think about for your own work. Are all of your articles working together as a single, cohesive team, or are they out there fighting each other for the same piece of turf? Because the choice between building a content portfolio and a content battlefield, well, that's ultimately up to you.